Hi, I'm Tom Hazel. Welcome to the Tullock Big Ideas About Information lecture. And this lecture series is made possible by a generous grant from our colleague, Gordon Tullock. And despite the sponsorship of Professor Tullock, they're not all public choice talks. But they're all provocative. They're all interesting, and they're all by seminal thinkers in the field. And today we have such a thinker, Stan Liebowitz, and in fact his co-author, Steve Margolis, two for the price of one, are in fact path-breaking empirical economists who have written some of the best stuff out there in the information sector, and always provocative and always thorough, and almost always controversial, which is just another little bonus. So students of mine are well familiar with their writings, and I think many of the other professors here are equally fond of them on the faculty, and many of their works are well known, but they're very careful empiricists and really have made a great contribution. And here we're going to have Stan Liebowitz regale us today with a talk. There will be a Q&A period. Please hold your questions until that period, and then in fact afterwards there is a reception out here in the Robert Levy atrium where we'll be able to talk with our guest today, Professor Stan Liebowitz.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, before I get going, I want to thank Tom and George Mason for their very kind invitation to come and talk here. It's always an honor to come to what is probably now the leading law and economics school in the country. Tom was suggesting that this topic might be one that takes a position, and it does. But we'll see. Not everybody always agrees with what my conclusion is going to be here. I do think the evidence is actually pretty overwhelming. I'm largely going to talk about the impact of piracy on record sales, with the idea of whether or not the Internet and the innovation of the Internet and the fact that it has led to piracy is going to be causing problems for various industries, particularly the entertainment industries, and whether or not we know what's going to happen, and then maybe what we can or can't do about it. Okay, so here's just a little, I went and looked for a few pictures to use. There's the boy crying wolf. I'll give you a little history of this topic, because the industry does get accused of crying wolf when there's a new potentially pirating type of technology. I'll talk about that a little bit before we get into sort of the details. First of all, I just thought it would be useful to mention that it's hard to think about copyright without thinking about technology at the same time. As long as the author of a work was tied to their work, there wasn't too much to worry about in the sense of someone making a copy of it, unless they had an incredibly good memory. But once technology allowed the work to be separated from the individual who created it, then became the option of people making copies. So that's sort of how we get started here. The Internet is an innovation. Innovations are supposed to make markets work better. They're supposed to make society wealthier. They're supposed to lead to improvements. And in many cases, that is exactly what has happened with the Internet. It is basically an innovation in distribution. And the nature of distribution has, in fact, led to, in this case, the distribution of unauthorized works. The Internet is an instance of creative destruction, where some old business models will change and be replaced by new business models because the Internet is a particularly efficient method at distributing certain types of products. Piracy, however, is not necessarily part and parcel of the Internet. You can think about them as two completely separate factors. Whether or not the internet leads to piracy is to a large extent really dependent on the rules that are in place when you use the internet in terms of trying to prevent people from engaging in piracy or not. Now, I'm not going to be commenting very much on what those rules have been or maybe what those rules should be, which would be an interesting talk on its own, but that's not what this talk is about. For whatever reason, and the reason is to a large extent that the rules have been such that it's very easy to engage in piracy, and there's very little in the way of fear, if you're a pirate, that there'll be any punishment when you engage in piracy. So we have had a large amount of piracy. I don't think there's any disagreement with that empirically. The question really is whether or not the piracy leads to harm, in this case, to the copyright owners. And there is clearly a debate on that, and there are differences of opinions. What I'm going to be trying to present is a claim that, in fact, the evidence is really overwhelming as to what the impact has been. And if people want to argue that it's a close call, they really don't have much to support their claims. Okay, music has been the early target of the piracy that we find on the internet. There are several reasons for that, but the main one was that music files were already in digital format. They're small, they're easy to compress. There were MP players already in existence when Napster came into existence, and it was difficult for the industry to put any sort of anti-piracy protection on the CDs, the way the CDs were currently set up. So for various reasons, music has been the main target early on, particularly for internet piracy. And so if you want to see what the impact of the piracy is, that's the place to go looking. Before I get into that, let me just sort of get into the crying wolf story, because this gets brought up quite a bit, and it is sort of interesting historically. There were three previous technologies that people talked about that allowed individuals to make copies of copyrighted works and non-copyrighted works. The Xerox machine, which was invented in 1959, that's at least the patent. Video recorders, the Betamax was the first successful video recording machine, late 1970s. And of course, it was eclipsed by VHS. And then cassettes. All of them allowed individuals to make copies. And in each case, the copyright industry, different copyright industries in each of these instances, became very concerned that the new technology might hurt their revenues. And yet there's no real evidence that any of these industries necessarily did. In the case of Xerox machines, which is, by the way, what brought me into this area of the impact of new technology on copyright owners, because we all know I was already a professor in 1959 when the Xerox machine was invented. Actually, several decades later, the Canadian government asked me to do a study of the impact of of photocopiers on copyright. And I examined the issue, and what I concluded was that, in fact, photocopying was not causing harm to copyright owners. And there was a reason for that. People were not generally going out and copying novels and carrying around hundreds of pages of loosely bound paper to read it. It was cheaper and easier to just buy a paperback. Where copying was occurring, and there were studies to examine the copying behavior, was in libraries. And what they were copying were things like journals, where there'd be a small number of articles, and you were interested in one of the articles or two of the articles, which were relatively easy to copy, and then you'd bring it back to wherever you were going to read it, and you didn't have to stay in the library while you read it, so it was more convenient for the people making the copies. Because the copying was taking place in a location that the publishers knew where it was fairly easy for them to charge a higher price to the institutions where the copying was going on. What I examined was the prices that journal publishers were charging to libraries versus individuals before photocopying came into existence and then after photocopying came into existence. And what I discovered was that there was virtually no dual pricing Before photocopying, there was essentially the same price for individuals as for libraries. But after 1959, the divergence in price became stronger and stronger. Libraries were paying 2, 3, 4 times as much as individuals for the same journal article. The number of new journals grew far greater than the number of potential readers. There was a whole shift towards journals and away from books. So it turned out that there was no evidence that the photocopying was causing any financial damage to the copyright owners. My suggestion to the Canadian government was that they didn't need to make any changes to the copyright law because the market had actually found an interesting way to take the extra money, the extra value that copiers were placing on the product they were copying and charge indirectly, which is something I called indirect appropriability, for the value of the copy. Next, we have video recorders. Okay, and here we have a picture of some version of the Boston Strangler. Some of you in the room know why that's on there and know what's coming. And you may say, what does this have to do with the Boston Strangler? Well, there are sometimes colorful individuals who make statements about new technologies. And here's a statement that's very well known to anybody who's looked at these issues by Jack Valenti, who's head of the MPAA. And he was comparing the video recorder to the Boston Strangler. And it was going to cause great damage to the industry. It was a terrible thing. And in fact, there were some reasonable grounds to be worried about this new technology that was, unlike the photocopier, was not going to go into a library, but was going to go into individuals' living rooms. And that made it more likely to be difficult for the publishers of the product to charge the higher prices because they don't know who has a photocopy machine and who doesn't. The problem was that people watch a lot of television. It's a problem for the analysis, the problem for the claim that it was going to cause damage. The fact that everybody was watching 4 hours of prime time or 3 hours of prime time every night, and they had one video recorder, and we're talking about watching television programs, meant that it was going to be hard to copy much and watch much that was copied, because when are you going to find the time to make the copy when you're not there, and then when are you going to find the time to watch it? Because you want to watch the programs that are on now, and you can't do both at the same time. And as long as people were watching all this television during prime time, they weren't going to be able to do it. Plus, it turns out Americans are very easy to convince that it's really difficult to program a VCR. All right, apparently it was like the most difficult task in the world. They never engaged in it. VCR started having a use that was not contemplated when this was actually first an issue. The Betamax case was about television. It was not about movies. The original Betamax couldn't even play a movie. The playing time was only 60 minutes. So you couldn't actually, unless it was a really short movie, it was not going to be playing movies and it wasn't going to be recording movies. After VHS and after the Beta 2 came out, they were capable of playing movies. And what had been unrecognized was that now that you could have more than an hour and a half, particularly with VHS, you get 2 hours or more, you could play movies. And the movie industry discovered there was a real market. It took them a while to discover this, but they discovered there was a real market for pre-recorded movies. And they started putting out more and more pre-recorded movies, pricing them at a price that would induce individuals to purchase them. And it then became the main revenue generator for the movie industry. All right, so someone could look at this and say, well, look, the industry is claiming it's going to cause harm. But of course, it was TV that was worried, not movies per se. But of course, Valenti was head of the MPAA. So it sounds like it's movies, but it was really about television. Because a lot of the companies that made movies also made television programs. So again, the net result of the video recorder was to benefit the entertainment industries. And there was very little evidence of harm. There was very little evidence that people were making a lot of copies and watching them. And the only thing that would cause damage, even if they watch a copy, is if they strip out the advertising. All right, and with the original video recorders, you couldn't even fast forward, and they were wired in. Then, of course, they were able to fast forward, but you had to watch carefully to make sure that you were going to not miss the beginning of the next section after the commercial. So it wasn't clear it was going to cause much damage, and there's very little evidence that it actually did, and we know it had this great side benefit. All right, so that's video recorders. The industry cried wolf, it didn't happen. Then we have cassette tapes. Here's another picture. A younger Alan Greenspan. All right, now, you may say, why is he on there? Was the Fed involved with this? And the answer is no, he wasn't at the Fed yet. He was at a consulting firm, Townsend and Greenspan, which is what he was doing before he joined the Fed. And he opined on the impact of cassette tapes. And what he says is that the property rights of copyright owners is going to get damaged, and the industry sounds very bad. It has no out unless something meaningful is done. The industry itself is at risk. This was probably more reasonable than the VCR argument. People had it at their homes. They could make cassettes when they weren't listening to music, and then they could listen to the music somewhere else. So some of the constraints that the VCR had wouldn't hold. But there was always a question of whether or not it was damaging the industry. And indirect appropriability sort of comes in here as well. If you make a cassette for your car, because let's say you have an LP. You can't play an LP in your car. It's one of the big problems with LPs. They were these big things. And cassettes come along, and one of the things cassettes allow you to do is to play music in your car. So you purchase the LP, you make a copy, cassette, unauthorized, but then you put it in your car. That raises the value that you place on the LP. Okay, because now when you purchase the LP, you don't just get the value from listening to the LP in your living room, you also have the value of listening to the cassette, which is enabled by the LP. So you might have indirect appropriability going on to some extent, and that might allow the recording industry to generate some of the revenues from those uses. And cassettes, when you make a copy of a copy of a copy, very quickly go down in quality. And so that was going to restrict how many copies you can make generationally, and you generally had to know people. You had to actually physically exchange the cassettes or the LPs or something. So it wasn't going to necessarily be big, but it seemed like it might have a negative impact. I was willing to believe that it might on this case. Greenspan's statement, however, was bad timing. He testified, and I'll show you in a few minutes, after 4 years or so of industry decline, when it looked like things were going bad. Right after he testifies, industry revenues start going up, and things look great, and it just doesn't seem what he says makes much sense at that point, because they started, sound recordings had a long expansion after this, and so I think people said it's not a serious problem.
So Greenspan was always weak on business cycles,
It wasn't a business cycle issue, even though it was the end of a business cycle. He should have known. Because I think the quote was 82 or 83, and so it was the end. Okay, so I'm going in the opposite direction, hitting the wrong button. It's a brand new pointer. All right, that brings us to MP3s. And I started writing about this when MP3s came out, and I was familiar with the other three. I'd written about photocopying, I had written slightly about cassettes, and I had written an unpublished piece about the video recorder. So I figured I should write about this as well. Since there was only a teeny little group of people that ever paid attention to these, I didn't want to lose my position there. And I wrote a paper which said that this time it would cause a problem. All right, because the economics was set up in such a way that the factors that kept the other type of technologies from really causing harm weren't going to come into play. All right, and in this talk, I'm going to claim it is causing major damage. All right, there's the wolf, not the one that we saw on the second slide, but a more serious, friendlier wolf. And so, before I get into discussing what economists have done, I want to discuss something that I wouldn't really feel comfortable saying necessarily in front of too many economists, because I would be accused of heresy. That is to say that sometimes methodology that we use to try to answer scientific questions doesn't have to be what we normally learn in textbooks. Okay, and one of the keys is whether or not what we're measuring is big enough. Okay, it makes a big difference when you're talking about cause and effect. If these are really big causes and really big effects, it's much easier to measure than if they're small. All right, so no one has to do a controlled test to see whether or not arsenic kills people. Okay, because you take a little and you're dead. We don't have to have two control groups. One group gets a placebo, and one group gets arsenic, and we see if the group with the arsenic dies and the group with the placebo doesn't. All right? We know that just from looking that arsenic has such a big effect, it shows it to us right away. No real need for normal scientific methods, because there's nothing else going on that could explain people dropping dead very quickly after taking the substance. Okay, and of course it's size, but it's sort of also quickly, how fast it happens. And so what I'm basically saying is the bigger the cause, then if there is a relationship, the bigger the effect. And if you actually have a really big cause and a really big effect that tend to happen at the same time, that's going to provide a lot of information that tells us that, in fact, there's a relationship which may be causal. Or there may be something, a third factor causing both of them, but they're likely to be related. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. This is supposed to be Ben Franklin. All right, now, of course, it's not really a picture of Ben Franklin, but I think it's someone dressed up as Ben Franklin. And you, of course, recognize he's conducting his electricity experiment, and he's got a kite, and he's got, on there, he's got his keys, which are going to conduct the electricity, and Franklin was something of a scientist. And more than we necessarily give him credit for. And he was quite good. And for a while, he lived in England, and he came up with a hypothesis, which was not generally accepted. I don't know if you can see all of this, but if you take a look, what he's saying is, because the language is a little bit different, that in this particular year, which is in 1784, he's giving his talk, and so he's talking probably about 1783. No, maybe 1784, it's hard to say. But he's saying there was a particularly cold winter that year. All right, the weather, the cold came early, and the snows remained, and it didn't melt. And why is that? And that's what the second point is here. He's saying, well, there was a lot of smoke in the air because there were these volcanoes in Iceland. Sounds familiar if you were traveling in Europe in the last summer, I guess. And he's suggesting that the volcanoes in Iceland were leading to the cold weather that occurred later that year in Europe. And that was a novel hypothesis, and it's one that might be true, it might not. You can sort of understand the logic of how it would happen, even though it's not intuitively obvious that it has to be that way. All right, but what happened a little while later is that there was this giant volcano that did occur. Now, it's after Franklin's time. It's 1815. That's not actually a picture of the volcano. Anyone taking a picture would be long dead. This is some nicer volcano where there's actually trees around it and whatnot. But that still looks pretty impressive. There was a big volcano in 1815. It was the biggest in the last 2,000 years. It does not happen very often. And here's an idea of how big this volcano was. Relative to a few others, there's Mount St. Helens, which is itty-bitty teensy-weensy down there. Here's Vesuvius, which is also itty-bitty teensy-weeny. And then there's a couple of more recent ones that, unless you're into volcanoes, you may not be that familiar with the names. This is the biggest one in the last 2,000 years. Oh, can you get rid of this? Great. I could have done that. I'm not thinking. Anyway, I'm not earning my money either. All right. So here's Tambora, and it's really big. All right, now the thing about this that's so good is Franklin has this hypothesis. The hypothesis is volcanoes cause cold weather, cold winters. All right, well, to really get a test, you can do very careful scientific evidence, look at a lot of little volcanoes and see whether or not little changes in weather match up with them, but there are small changes. When you get a really big one, you should get a really big change. It should be much easier to measure because there's always a lot of background noise. And the difficult thing in conducting a lot of analysis is to get rid of the background noise. Controlled experiments get rid of it by the control. Economists try to get rid of the background noise to some extent by having a lot of data points and doing some statistical analysis that's somewhat fancy. But another way is to just sort of find a big cause and a big effect. If Franklin's right, we're going to have a cold winter. 1815. So here's this slide I found. When I was a kid, in fact, up until the first year in college, I was interested in the weather. I was a meteorology major when I went to college. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And one of the things I had remembered reading was this great year, the Year Without a Summer, it was called. And I would read it from time to time, and it sounded great because I liked bad weather. And this was a lot of bad weather. Now, this is a 1999 picture, and there's a little volcano, so someone already knows that the volcano has something to do with it. But in 1816, the year after the volcano, all right, you have snow in New York in June, ice in the water in Pennsylvania in the middle of the summer, crop failures throughout the northern hemisphere, the worst famine of the century. This is actually serious stuff. A lot of people died. And it wasn't just North America, it was also in Asia and Europe. And so this is pretty strong evidence that Franklin was right. You have this unique unique summer, really cold year. If there's any year they talk about for being really cold, this is it for the last several hundred years, and they didn't talk about it much before that, not in a written way, and it comes right after the volcano. To me, I would say that proves Franklin's point. Now, I'm not a volcano person. I didn't do enough reading about it to get a feel, but when I was reading about it, they think that volcanoes cause the temperature, as Franklin said, but they refer to it as a hypothesis, like they're not really completely sure, and I'm not sure how sure they are or aren't. But to me, it seems like you should be pretty sure. That was very convincing. It could have been a fluke, that something else caused that cold year, but that's very unlikely. These are very unlikely events. And for one to occur after the other, as you might expect, exactly as Franklin predicted, that's really pretty overwhelming. And more overwhelming than any econometric studies that I ever read. All right? Particularly if you know how they're done. They're not usually overwhelming. All right, so the claim is that I'm making is, and that's something you don't hear very often, that if there's a very, very strong event and a very strong result that are both unlikely and unusual, then there's a very high likelihood they're going to be related. They may not be cause and effect, but they're likely to then have the same cause and both be effects. All right, and so that, I think, is something we can apply to sound recordings, and I am going to be not completely heretical in this. I'm going to talk about the economic studies as well. But first, let's talk about the simple examination. And what I'm suggesting is that essentially file sharing is to piracy what tambora was to volcanoes. It was a very big, sudden increase in piracy, unlike anything we had seen before. That happened very quickly. Napster was the beginning of piracy in this type of form, and within a year it had 20 million people using it. Remember the head of Napster, the guy who invented it, Sean Fanning, was on the cover of Time magazine. This was a big deal, and lots of people were using it in a very short amount of time. And then the question is, what happened to record sales? What we're going to see is record sales had a very big decline, unlike any other declines that we have in the modern records. All right, and there's a logic that I actually think is a little easier to understand than the volcano hypothesis. I mean, the volcano, yes, it's putting soot in the air, and that might weaken the sunlight coming in, but you could have also argued, well, any sun that comes in then gets trapped, and maybe it's really going to be global warming or something instead of cooling. It's not that straightforward. There's going to be a version of that here as well, but the basic story is when you have a copy that is a virtually perfect substitute for an original, all right, why would you go out and buy the original? That seems to be pretty clear that there'll be people who won't buy the original after they have this very good substitute, and therefore there's every reason to think that if people are getting free copies, they're probably not buying as many originals. All right, so the theory, looking at it this way, you'd say, well, we should have a big decline in record sales. All right, not something little, but we've had this big a decline, this big an increase in piracy, we should have a big decline in record sales. All right, so what happened to record sales in the U.S.? Here we have the line going up until the year 1999. You can see when Napster begins, oh, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up and goes down. Here's where Greenspan is testifying. All right, so you see it's come down. Now, we had a really big recession in 1982, and we had another recession in 1980. The economy was really quite bad there, but that's the biggest decline in this period of time. Here's what happened since. All right, now, this is albums per person. All right, but a similar thing would, if we looked at revenues, we would have a similar result. And all I did here was to say, assume that we had the same growth rate after 1999 that we did before 1999. What would that have looked like? And that's the purple line, or the line at least with the purple markers. Here's what actually happened, and here's where Napster begins. The timing is just amazingly good. All right, the year after Napster takes off, or the year that Napster is taking off, is when record sales start going down. It's almost too good to be true. All right. And you don't expect it to necessarily be quite that close, but it's really perfect as a story. Here are the revenues between 1999 and 2009. And unlike, if you may have seen other revenue examinations, I'm controlling for inflation, all right, which makes the revenue differential bigger than if I didn't control for inflation. And it's a tremendous decline. These are 2009 dollars, so these dollars for 1999 are higher than they were in 1999. But it's approximately 18 billion then, and it's approximately 7 billion now. It's a big decline. Rarely do we see industries with this type of decline in a 10-year period. All right, if the automobile industry had any type of decline like this, it would be in the news every day. Here are all the top 10 markets in the world. All right, it's not just the U.S. thing. In fact, the U.S. does not have the biggest declines. Italy and Spain have bigger declines, and yes, Japan has a smaller decline, but every one of the top 10 markets has a big decline. And one of the other things about the top 10 markets is they're usually highly industrialized. They have computers, they have the internet, and so they're all capable of having file sharing as well, and they all did have various types of file sharing. And so it's not just the U.S., it's the entire industrial world. All right, so the question is, we had this enormous cause, we had this enormous effect. Is that enough to say that file sharing is responsible for the decline that's occurred? I actually think the answer is yes. You can stop here and say that the case is really made, that you don't need anything else. All right, but there are many who say that file sharing hasn't caused this decline. And I can understand at least saying, let's at least look for some possible alternatives. Would everyone please turn their phones off? Come on. 1, 2, 3. Goodbye. Yeah. Here we go. Come on. Turn off. Thank you. All right. Yes, I bought that. That's my favorite music from college. All right. The question is, did I buy the newer version when the cassettes came out, or did I just copy it? But, okay. So people have come up with, I jumped ahead. All right. Is there something else that could have caused it? That is reasonable to look at. After all, if there's something else that is equally plausible, we would at least want to look at that. And people have, in fact, come up with other possible explanations. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the conversion of LPs into CDs, taking an old library of music and turning it into new music, the increase in DVDs and video games. I'm not going to talk about music getting bad. That is a hard thing to measure. You just got old. It just seems like the music got bad. The fact is that I wrote a paper or two looking at this. I actually did try to come up with a measure for whether or not music was getting bad. I looked at concerts, and I looked at radio, for old music versus new music on radio. Radio was down, but not the stations that were playing the newer music. They actually were doing fine, and concert sales were up. So there was really no evidence that the music had gotten bad. Bad economy, well, it turns out if we exclude the recession, the severe one in 2008, 2009, that the only recession that occurred in the 2000s prior to that was the mildest recession we've had since World War II, basically. All right, so the tech bust recession was extremely mild. And every other decade had more severe recessions than the tech. So that this is also doesn't hold up very well. This is a bit of a joke that people are spending so much on the iPods, on the hardware, they have no money left for the software. Obviously, you have to use them together. The amount that you would spend under normal circumstances would be for the combination, and you're only spending money on the hardware and then not being able to afford software if you are planning not to pay for the software. Otherwise, it would make no sense to buy a piece of hardware that you'll never be able to use. And the outbreak of deafness is also a bit of a joke. Yes, if we were all getting deaf, we probably wouldn't listen to music as much. but I'm not aware of any major outbreak. So the three alternatives that are getting the most credence in the analysis that people are putting forward are the librarying and then the DVD and the video games. All right, so I thought we would look at that for a moment. All right, none of them are going to hold up very well. The librarying story is that you have an LP and you listen to LPs, and then cassettes come along or CDs come along, and you can't play your LPs anymore, and you certainly can't play your LP in the car, and so now you go buy them in a new form, which is the new format. So you buy a CD because you want to play it in your CD player, and you can't stick that old LP record into your CD player. All right, so the claim is that you're artificially, if you want to use that term, quotes around artificial, buying more music than you otherwise would because you want to convert your old favorites into the new technology. And that's certainly possible. It seems reasonable that people would do some amount of that. But to explain the decline that I just showed you seems to be pushing it fairly hard, because that would imply that a tremendous amount of the sales are in fact due to people replacing music, and they stopped in 1999 suddenly replacing it, and sales then, instead of going down one time, because whatever the replacement value was, now it's down to zero, go down year after year after year. So it's hard to even make sense of this entirely unless we're always replacing a little less each year. And then that could explain the decline, but again, the amount of replacement would have to be very large. Well, it turns out that we actually can test that to some extent. All right, and one way to test that, and I can say that I suggested this test before I had any data to test it. And what I had said is if we could get data on the share of old music that people are buying, we could see whether or not it's going down. Because what we should expect to see based on this librarying hypothesis is people are buying artificially large amounts while they're replacing their library. And then all of a sudden, in 1999, they've finished, and now the percentage of old music should be going down. It doesn't do that. There are two categories of old music here. They are not separate. There's catalog, which includes deep catalog. And catalog, I've actually seen two different definitions of this, and I'm not sure exactly which one's right. But I believe that one is 18 months or more, and the other one is 36 months or more. So they're still not that old. And, you know, we're talking about 20-year-old songs or 10-year-old songs if you're replacing something from an old technology frequently. But they would be included in these categories. And the categories should be going down, but they're not. They're going up. All right, so there's no evidence to support the claim that librarying actually reduces, the effect of librarying is responsible for any of the decline that's occurred. I mean, it may have had an impact on sales in the past, but it doesn't seem like it's going to show up in 1999 and lead to a decline in sales. All right. And just think about how big librarying would have to be to explain the decline of 60%, which we're finding. Now, there's also this claim that, and people would say to me, well, DVDs are out there now. And DVDs are so great because CDs have music, and DVDs have music and pictures. And they're sort of the same price. So you get more for your money with a DVD than a CD. This is what students would say to me with a straight face. All right? And I'd say, well, but you listen to your CD dozens of times if it's any good. How many times are you going to watch that DVD? And it doesn't matter how much money it costs to produce the DVD. That has nothing to do with your consumption of it or the market demand. But still, that was the claim that DVDs were responsible. And it is true that DVDs are relatively new, and it is true that DVDs were increasing. But that's the wrong thing to look at. DVDs did not come out of nowhere. DVDs are pre-recorded movies. We had pre-recorded movies before DVDs existed. They were called VHS tapes. All right, because VHS killed the beta machine that I had talked about a few minutes ago, as we all know. At least everybody over 30 knows that, I presume. And so here we have the amount that people spend on pre-recorded video with one other category, which is you don't just buy movies, you also rent movies. And renting a movie takes money and it takes time, just like buying a movie. And so that needs to be included as well. And one of the reasons it's important to pay attention is that there's a period of time here where rentals are declining while the pre-recorded movies sales are going up. And if you only look at sales, you're going to get an exaggerated view of the increase in sales. Now, what would we want to see here if we wanted to say that, in fact, DVDs or pre-recorded movies are responsible for the decline in CDs? They may be substitutes, but what we would expect to see is that something dramatic happens around the year 1999 or 1998 or 2000, but something dramatic happens where suddenly there's a sharp increase in expenditure on DVDs that would cause people to stop spending money on CDs. And we don't really get that. Yes, there's an increase that's occurring, and maybe it would have an impact on CDs, but it's hard to say, because look at this one. This is a real increase. This one is going from $5 to $80. That's a $75 increase during the 80s. Here we're going from $80 to $100, $20 increase. It's much smaller. What was happening? Okay, so there's the increase we're getting now, but that only goes to the year 2005. I wasn't showing you everything. After 2005, sales start going down. All right, so now you're going to have trouble explaining the decline in CDs if the major explanation for why they're declining is that people are spending more money on DVDs, and they're not. They're not spending money on DVDs anymore. It's going down. So that's a problem. Here's the increase that I was just talking about in the 80s, which is much bigger. If DVDs or pre-recorded movies was a really good substitute and really took money away from CDs, you should see it most significantly in here. What do we actually see? Well, that's just about the time Greenspan was giving his talk or making his statement. This is a really robust increase in sales, while DVDs, or in this case VHS tapes, are having an enormous increase. All right, so if there's anywhere where, if DVDs cause a decline in record sales, this is where it should be showing up, and there's nothing showing up there. It's the opposite. So even if DVDs did reduce sales of records to some extent, it can't be very strong, or presumably would have had some impact here. So that's basically the DVD story. And if you go back 1 second, if you take a look, DVD sales now are about the same as they were in 1999. If DVDs were any sort of reasonable share, or the main cause, CD sales should be back where they were in 1999. But they're not. They've just gone down and down and down. All right, so the evidence for DVDs is really very weak. Now there's video games, another market that has had growth, one that's had more growth than DVDs. But let's take a look at that period right around 1999. What happens? Well, video game sales go up to 2002, and then they go down, and they're basically not changed very much between 2000 and 2005. So it's hard to understand how that could lead to a big decline in CD sales. Then you have a big increase. All right, it's apparently all three major game systems came out with new versions right around here. So there's this big increase in expenditure. If video games were going to be causing a decline in record sales, this is where you should see it. You should see a big decline in 2007, 2008, and 2009, but very minor declines, if any, earlier. All right, but here we go again. There's no major acceleration in the decline in 2007, 2008, 2009. It looks just like most of the other declines. Oh, by the way, you might be saying to yourself, well, there's 1 year here that's not declining. What's different about that year? That's actually the year the RIA lawsuits against individual file sharers came out. All right. Now, and in this period of time where there shouldn't be much of a decline because video games are not growing, there is a decline. So again, the timing doesn't really make sense. All right. Now, based on this, even if you're saying, well, the volcano and whatnot, that was all very cute, but that's not sufficient, just have two things. Well, now we've taken a look at the two big things that happen to work in such a way that they seem to imply that file sharing is responsible for the decline. We now gone through the alternatives, the only alternatives people have come up with. I've tried looking at all of them. None of them hold water. None of them can explain virtually anything of the loss consistently. Is that enough? I would say yes. I would say now we have enough. But the fact is we have econometricians who have looked at this. All right? And so what do they find? All right? Here are our econometricians. And, well, most of them find that file sharing causes harm. So even if you don't want to accept the simple methodology, all right, most of the academic studies find harm. These are all of them by year they're published, and then the last two here have not been published. All right, so they're just working papers. But all of these find harm, and contrary to what I read in much of the literature, they're not that disparate in terms of their findings. All right, what you'll find is something like the Zentner paper will say file sharing reduced sales by 10%. It's actually 8%. And that, yeah, and someone else will say, Robin Waldfogel, 0.2 of an album for each illegal one downloaded. All right, and someone else may say a 25 or a 40% decline in sales. All right, well, are they really saying different things? Well, the answer is if you take a look, they all have different time periods of analysis. When Zentner does his, he's doing 2001 as the year where he's actually conducting his study. That's the data that he's using. Sales were only down by about 10%. He finds file sharing leads to a decline of 10%. So his result is all of the decline is due to file sharing. And that's true of the Pikes and Rollberg paper. It's due to the Zentner paper. It's true in the Liebowitz. It's Michael, I don't actually know how you pronounce it, even though I've met the guy several times. He gets about 70% of the decline being due to file sharing. Robin Waldfogel gets something that is consistent with 100% of the decline being due to file sharing. Zentner gets, in this paper, also something that's a little less than 100, but not that much less. Hong is the lowest here with 20% of the decline. All right? My 2008 paper gets 100% of the decline. Waldfogel is basically redoing his earlier paper and getting the same results. Blackburn gets 100% of the decline due to file sharing, and Zentner's new one has 100% of the decline. But the decline gets bigger and bigger year by year if it's 100% of a bigger number, which is what happens, which is why it may sound like they're different when an early paper says it's a 10% decline and a later paper says it's a 40% decline. But they're still, if you form a metric relative to the actual decline in sales, they're pretty consistent. And most of the decline seems to be due to file sharing in these studies. Now, there are some other studies that do not find this result. And I thought I'd spend a few minutes on those. The first study is a paper that was written by two academics who are British, doing a study for the Canadian government. And here's a quote from their conclusion, but it may actually be in their abstract. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's a quote. And they say that in their results are that downloading the equivalent of one CD in files increases the purchase of these CDs by about a half of a CD. All right? And they say this with, as you'll see, a completely straight face. And it is a fairly remarkable conclusion. Now, they made their data available, which was very good of them. All right? You're supposed to do that, but not everyone does that. And if you look at their data, you discover that, and they may even mention this somewhere, the average file sharer downloads the equivalent of 24 CDs a year. Seems like a lot, but that's what they say the numbers are. Given their result that each downloaded CD increases sales of real CDs by a half, that should increase sales of real CDs among this group by 12 CDs per person. All right? And their results, because this is all based on a survey of Canadians, there's the survey that they used, which was conducted by the Canadian government for them, a particular portion of the Canadian government. In their survey, half the people in the population, according to the supposedly representative survey, were file sharers. All right, so that if half the people were file sharers and the file sharers would increase sales of CDs by 12, then that means there'd be six CDs sold a year due to file sharing. All right, that's what their results say. If you just apply their result to their raw numbers. All right, that is really very interesting, because if you take a look at how many CDs Canadians actually buy, they only buy 2 CDs a year. Now that's actual sales. All right, so if the study is right, the recording industry in Canada should thank God for file sharing because nobody in Canada would buy a CD except for the fact that file sharing exists. All right. That is the implication of this conclusion. And not only that, it's hard to know what to make out of it. The real numbers are that there would be minus 4 CDs sold per year, all right, without file sharing. Now, I don't know exactly what minus 4 CDs means. Maybe it means that the record companies have to pay people to buy 4 CDs, all right? But that's what the numbers say. Now, I actually told them, I emailed them and wrote them about this and said, that seems crazy to me. Plus, if you actually read their study, it has the entire population, file sharers and non-file sharers. Right? If you look at the entire population and they run their regressions, file sharing has a negative impact. But they say, well, we don't want to include the entire population. We want to run the study only on file sharers. Never understood, it never made any sense to me why, but it did give them this negative result. But it would be like saying, let's see whether smoking tobacco makes people sick or not. And we have all this data, whether people smoke or not, and what their likelihood of dying from lung cancer is, and saying, well, let's throw out all the non-smokers. Let's only look at the smokers. That's what they're doing. It doesn't make any sense, all right, when they get their positive results. All right, now, I will say they were always very upfront to what their results were. They made their data available. They were proud of their results, to be honest. But when they finally published it, the positive numbers disappeared. All right, now they're saying there's no impact. All right, they redid it. And when I actually emailed them about that, and they said, well, you know, we got your comments, and that, among other things, made us decide that we needed to redo it. Of course, they didn't redo it the way I suggested they redo it, which is just include everybody and report those results. But now they're saying it's 0. Okay. Now, here are some other claims that are made about what's going on in this industry by other experts. And I'll just show you the claims, and then I'll talk about them in some detail. Here's a claim that says, discussing what's going on in the industry, it says, why there are major markets where record sales are going up, even though they have file sharing populations. All right, well, we've already sort of seen that. Here are all the major markets. All right, which one is not going down? And the answer is none of them are not going down. I have no idea where that came from. And I don't know how this happens, that editors let this happen, but they make the statement without giving any reference to what those countries might be or what time period they may be looking at. Then I came across this statement here that says, concert sales have increased more than music sales have fallen. A nice factual statement. But again, there's no reference to actual numbers. If you look up from Polestar the concert sales, and you look up from the RA the record sales, and you run them together and you take inflation adjustments, you get this diagram. Doesn't seem like it's going up. But they're saying it does. How can they do that? I don't know. This is what you find in academic work sometimes. All right. Then there's this. There is a group of papers that report that file sharing does not hurt sales. Well, there is a group of such papers. And then they list some of them, one of which is a paper by a guy at the University of Connecticut named Bhattacharjee. All right, that's my best guess. I met him, but he was actually asked about this. All right, and here's what he says. He was Chronicle of Education had heard that he had listed this, and there was a dispute about whether he actually said that. And so he says to the Chronicle, no, we never said any such thing. All right, now, then there's this, talking about something I'm familiar with. One of the hypotheses as to why record sales have fallen, I haven't mentioned. All right, it has been suggested that the reason record sales have fallen the way they have, you saw the chart, is because there's been a shift from retailers who specialized in records to retailers that were big box retailers. All right, and the logic went something like this. Big box retailers are more efficient than record stores. They don't have anywhere near the amount of inventory because that's what makes Walmart so good. So they're carrying less inventory, and because they have less inventory, they're not buying as many records because they have to work through their old inventory. All right, so the claim was that the decline in record sales, they actually said, is 50% or so, is due to this movement to more efficient retailers who aren't carrying inventory. Well, that's actually sort of crazy because this has gone on for like 8 years. I mean, these must be old records in that inventory. How is it possibly responsible for this? So I wrote something criticizing it, and I actually got some data on record inventories. which is an organization called National Association of Retail Merchandisers, NARM, which keeps statistics on retail inventories. And there was no reduction in the retail inventories over the period they were talking. All right, so this is their response to that. And their response is, well, of course it doesn't show you anything in those numbers because Walmart is not included in those statistics. Now, when I first saw this statement, I said they must know what they're talking about. They're making a very simple, factual claim. It must be true. They wouldn't say it if it wasn't. So then I did a little searching, and it turns out there is a company that made the news in 2008 called Handelman. And Handelman was basically the retail merchants who handled music sales for Walmart. That was majority of their business. So yes, Walmart's not part of the NARM. They're not a merchandiser. But they do have a merchandiser that sells music to them, and that merchandiser happens to be called Handelman. Now you might say, or somebody might say, well, but maybe they're not a member of NARM. Well, guess what? They won Retailer or Merchandiser of the Year twice. All right, now remember, they got out of business in 2008, but they were the Merchandiser of the Year. The real reason they've gone out of business is because record sales are doing so badly. All right, but they're definitely in NARM. They won the award twice from that group. So the claim that Walmart's inventories are included in the statistics is being made with no support whatsoever. Maybe they asked NARM whether Walmart was a member, but I don't even know that. Okay, here's another one. This is what you encounter sort of in this literature. In 2005, retail music sales rose in 4 of the 5 largest national markets. Well, in that year, here are the top 10 national markets. And yes, it went up in Japan, but it went down in every other. No reference, just a claim. And remember, these claims are made to support empirical results trying to show that file sharing is not causing record sales. Here's another one. In the U.S., the drop in 2005 is due to losses at a single firm. Here are the firms, and then there's this catch-all for the independents. And guess what? Yes, Sony BMG had a decline, but so did everyone else except UMG, and the others had the really big decline, the independents. So another statement without a reference. That's wrong. All right. Oh, and here's one that for those of you who are more statistically oriented. They claim that they're going to conduct a test, the writers of this particular quote, using Big Champagne data. And they're going to tell us something about record sales. And their claim is that they're going to use the summers to conduct a particular test because they know that college students are away from their campus computers, and therefore there's less file sharing in the summer. That's their claim. Well, I happen to have exactly the same data, all right, from Big Champagne. And there's the first summer, and they're right. This is called seasonality, by the way. If something happens year after year after year, just like retail sales are basically highest in December because of the Christmas holidays, that's what they're arguing about the summer here. But there's the second summer in their data, no decline in record sales there. Here's the third summer, no decline in record sales there. This is just a statement that they're making, which they claim comes from this evidence. That's just not true. And they might say they never looked at the data, and maybe they didn't, but they should never have said this. Now, who all are responsible for this large array of errors? All right, where is this coming from? Well, one pair of authors. All right, this is the most well-known file sharing paper of all is Professor Oberholzer and Strumpf. Okay, who just litter their papers with statements without any references. All right, and then when you investigate, it turns out you can't know for sure that they're wrong, but the evidence doesn't appear to support it. They give you no evidence to support them. All right, now, what I haven't shown you is that, in fact, they make a crucial error in their main regressions, something I was not aware of until last year. I've read the paper several times, but it took me a while to actually figure that out. That invalidates their main regression results independent of any of the other statements they make. That paper's been sitting at the journal that published their paper. It's been there almost a year now. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm convinced they should publish it, but that doesn't mean they will. Okay, but there's one slightly worse thing, perhaps worse, I don't know, and that is hiding your data. All right, and so I'll just give you a little bit of this. This is a quote from this Chronicle of Higher Education story. where the author was interested in this issue, where there is clearly a debate going on between us, and I was suggesting that they should have made their data public, something the journal that publishes their paper requires, but didn't require when their paper was submitted. They now require it, but not at that time. And so the question was whether or not Mr. Coleman, Strumpf, is saying that he always told me it was impossible to see the data. All right? And he shows an email, which I have, and I have copies of other emails from him that are ambiguous, and I think this one was even somewhat ambiguous. But that's April 2004. A month after that supposedly occurred, in May of 2004, there's a quote at a conference, a public conference, which is the Future of Music, which is a big conference. This is available on the web. And Jim Griffin, who's well known in music circles, says, Coleman, why won't you share the numbers? We're both on the panel together. And I'm complaining that Coleman's not making his data available. And here's what Coleman says. I was all for opening it up, but our university lawyers won't let us make it available. All right? As soon as these lawsuits, because that's what he's sort of talking about, the legal environment quiets down, everything will be given out. Now, if you heard that, would you think that he's going to give the data out someday? Is that an unreasonable thing to assume? I don't think so. At any rate, then they now claim, something they didn't claim earlier, and they didn't claim in an earlier email, that they have a confidentiality agreement with OpenNAP. Now, one of the things is I think OpenNAP does not exist anymore. It's long gone. I presume I should ask the lawyers in the room, when you have a confidentiality agreement with somebody that doesn't exist anymore, do you still have to uphold it? I don't know. I presume that you don't, but maybe I'm wrong. But then he was asked to show a copy by the reporters doing the story, and they would not do it. Okay, my guess is there was no such, I don't know this for sure, but that's my guess, no such thing. Okay, so that's, those are the papers that say that there's no decline in the file sharing. All right, now, are all the papers that I showed you on that list saying the file sharing causes harm, are they all gems? No, they're not all gems. They have problems too. All right, but they don't have a result as crazy as the Canadian study that you can sort of throw out upon first examining what it is. And they don't seem to have the problems that Oberholzer and Strumpf have either. So yes, some of them have problems, but they're not quite, certainly no worse than these. All right, so to finish up so that we still have time for questions, the last thing I want to talk about is, okay, so we know things are bad for the record industry. All right, and I'm suggesting it's due to piracy. What should we do about it? Now, the people who write these articles sort of agree that it's due to piracy, and they want to be helpful to the industry. And so they come up with suggestions. One of the suggestions is, well, you can't monetize selling music anymore because everyone's taking it. And they're not paying, and you can't make them pay. So you have to find things that are hard to pirate and try to monetize those. All right, well, that's true if you can find things that are not easily pirated, that have sufficient value, you might try selling those. The problem is it's hard to come up with exactly what those would be. Sometimes, there are some theoretical models which claim that they can figure out how to turn P2P around so that piracy on its own disappears. I'll mention those in a later slide. And those models are sort of crazier models than most. All right? They assume that the respondents are going to act in a way that's hard to believe they would. That's those models, a little naive. All right, their heart's in the right place, but a little naive. So here's the people who say that the industry should move to other products like T-shirts and autographs and whatnot. If there was a good substitute that could generate similar levels of revenue, that would be a useful thing to switch over to. The one that's usually mentioned actually is concerts. All right, concerts do generate revenue. Record companies, from my understanding, are beginning to enter into what are called 360 contracts, where they're trying to share a piece of the concert revenues, but it's not a first best solution. Concert revenues were always there. If it was most efficient to be giving away music, for example, and getting something from the artist for the concert revenues, that's what they would have done. That would be an efficient model. If that's an efficient model, that's presumably what they would have done before. Somebody would have found it in the previous decades of selling music. The fact that they didn't do that meant it's an inferior model. And therefore, it may be something that generates some revenue, but it's not, it's only a second best, and it may or may not be a good second best. I don't claim to know that. All right, so that's to try to take concert revenues. Then there's the T-shirts and autographs. Well, I'm not an expert in this industry. I don't know how much money they generate on T-shirts and autographs and whatnot, but I find it hard to believe they generate anything near what they would get from selling CDs, so I don't think the money is there to be able to generate very much from that other product that's harder to pirate. All right. Then there's the let's give music away and rely on advertising. Advertising is a model that has existed in different forms, in different ways. Certainly television was advertising-based. Radio is advertising-based. Radio plays music. Maybe somehow the recording industry should own radio. Because right now, when radio plays music, they don't pay anything to the recording industry for that. And when radio does this, they have commercials that interrupt the music usually. And when television does it, they really interrupt the program. And they are interrupted at the very worst time, because that's when the commercial tends to be worst the most. It's common sense. So in order to have advertising generate as much revenue as it might, you have to have some sort of system where it's playing music and then interrupting and forcing people to listen to the ads and then going back to the music, sort of the way radio has done it. The problem is we already have radio, and it doesn't pay really anything for the recordings. How is it that we can have the record companies sort of create their own radio and generate sufficient revenues? Now, it is true that radio revenues are quite large, but it's not the revenues. It's got to be sort of the net of the cost of the radio. You need to cover all the costs of what record companies normally do, which is finding talent and nurturing talent and promoting the groups and whatnot. So it's unclear that they're going to be able to find the money to do that in radio. One possibility would be is if they can use the internet, kill off radio, make the internet radio, replace that, and generate all the revenues for themselves, and have the record companies own the radio stations, but on the internet. But I don't know how they do that. That's not something that is naturally going to happen. That would at least generate some revenues. And of course, radio actually has been in a slump since 2004, even though it did go up last year. All right, so there may be something here. Advertising is a method, but I presume that's also probably a bad second best. All right. And then we have the models that I think are sort of the craziest, the ones that the picture actually are representing. And these are theorists, and I am in a building, I'm in a business school with some of them. All right, and they're just running their models and trying to solve the world's problems. They have models, and I've seen several of them, where file sharers are going to be converted from non-paying to paying. And the way you convert them is to give them a piece of the music when it's sold downstream. So you're the first one to buy the music over the internet or download it, file share, but you agree to buy it because then if someone buys it from you, you'll get some of their money. Yes, this is a giant pyramid scheme where the people at the end wind up paying and getting nothing, never figuring out. This is like going to last for a long time. And everyone is worse off on average because they're getting it for free if they engage in piracy. And under this system, they're paying something for it. Probably not very much, but they're paying something. Are users really going to switch away from the system that lets them get it free to a system that makes them collectively worse off, and on average, worse off? I don't see this possibly working. All right. But the IS, people love it. So at any rate, that's pretty much it. I have one final slide, and then we'll have questions and answers. All right. The one thing that I think is most clear is piracy does have a negative impact on file sharing, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise. That's right, I never even got into talking about sampling, but we're out of time anyway, so that's fine. Does econometrics add anything to our knowledge? My guess would be not really. All right? If you're not in the music business, as long as you have a job somewhere else, you might be happy to not be in a declining business. If you're in the software, book, video, or other information industry, you should be looking at your future, figuring out how you can avoid what's been going on in the music business, and the music business needs to see if there's some way to keep file sharing from causing the harm. All right, and that would require actually figuring out a way to reducing piracy on the internet, something that it seems as a society we're particularly reluctant to do. So that's the talk.
Go ahead and raise your hand and.
Okay, I'll try it over there.
You had up a chart twice with by country revenues.
Yeah, you want me to go back?
Well, the startling thing was Japan was so far ahead of the whole rest of the world. I mean, they were spending so much more. I mean, is that because
You mean
a rabbit warren or something?
they have the smallest declines, is what you're saying?
No, not only that, they looked like the real numbers. Japan looked like it was way, way ahead of anyone else.
All right, let's see. It's we're almost there. Let's see. No, I guess I'm going the wrong way.
It was like U.S. was 5 and Japan was 450 or something.
Okay, here we go. I mean, the Japan's at 26%. The UK is at 37%.
Percentage, it's the real numbers.
Oh.
It's the magnitude.
Oh no, those are in their local currencies. Those are yen. You can't compare them. These are in order of size. The U.S. is by far the biggest size. All right, so this is their local currency, corrected for inflation, not turned into dollars. Yeah.
It says 2009 U.S. dollars.
Well,
The dollar was
no, it says adjusted for 2009, and what I meant by the dollar sign was currencies, but I couldn't fit it in there. All right.
So Japanese really don't buy 50.
No, they don't. They don't. They're number 2. Okay, we had go in order, which I think the hands went up. Tom.
Well, I assume some people make the argument that notwithstanding the decline in sales, that consumers may be better off. There's a lot more.
People make that argument. That is absolutely right. And on a static analysis, when you're not taking into account of any possible gains, there are, yes, and it's always the case in the static analysis here where you don't have any impact on the production. Allowing more consumers in always makes things better off. And so, yes, that's true. They point that out. Their claim is that even if you might include the dynamic, maybe they'd still be better off, but that's just a guess because nobody really knows those numbers. Yeah, Adam.
Sam, I was really impressed with your DVD chart because you have a similar event study that I expect you to do from that, which is starting in 2003, 2004, the DVD sales are going
Well, I mean,
video sales.
it's not that steep.
Well, but it's a start, and I'm,
Oh, is that due to piracy?
Well, because
Yeah.
2000, what starts in 2000, 2004, you start to get broadband, starting to get mass distribution of broadband and mass availability of that, and everyone is like, oh, broadband is what now makes piracy.
Now, that's true. You might start saying, well, this is the beginning of piracy for DVDs. The problem is that the last 2 years are the recession. It's a big recession. We don't know how much of this is due to the recession and how much isn't. So that only gives us really 2.5, 3 years. If, when the recession's over, it's still going down, then I think that there's some pretty good. That's right. Okay, now I've lost the order again, so I'll just sort of go left to right. Go ahead.
Just a quick comment on that. I think that you can see that, though, in your music slide about kids going home for the summer. I'd be interested to see how that compares with propagation of broadband in the home.
Okay, but kids don't go home. Well, they do go home for the summer, but it wasn't showing up in the.
But that's what I'm saying. The first year it did, but then it didn't in subsequent years. It was that because of broadband.
No, there's not enough change there. It's just random fluctuation. Why it went down the first year is not entirely clear. It's big champagne data. It's not even clear whether it's that accurate. But that was the data that they used to draw their conclusion that there's a summer effect, a seasonality effect. And my point is when 2 of the 3 seasons don't work, you don't have seasonality. So, if 1 Christmas out of 5 had sales go up, you couldn't say, well, we have this big seasonality where every Christmas sales go up. It just that the evidence doesn't support it. That's all I was trying to say there. The broadband's been growing year by year, and I have data and some econometrics looking at that at various points. I'm not sure that looking at the Big Champagne data would add much to it. All right. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the back. Haven't been to the back.
I wonder how you account for sort of fundamental changes in the record industry, and what I would argue is really the failure of the business model, changes in the cost of production, really lowering the barrier of entry, people producing money records on their own, and also changes in barriers of entry to distribution, using purely electric distribution, and never actually producing a record or a CD, and how that sort of enters into your analysis.
I don't actually look at it in any sort of way where I have numbers. But what I would suggest is, yes, in the last decade or so, the computers have made it easier to make music. But we've always had garage bands making music and putting them on cassette tape and sending it. There's lots of movies that do that, that show people doing that. There may be more of that now because it's easier to make the album. I'm not 100% sure. But I expect most of those bands would like to make money because the old bands used to like to make money. And if they're interested in making money, they still would like a record contract. As far as I know, a lot of the groups that sort of make it on their own that weren't known before wind up signing record contracts. Now, it is true that some of the major acts, Radiohead and whatnot, decided to sort of go on their own, but they already have a brand name that the record company helped them create. And so it's easier for them. If you remember, the Beatles had their own record company. Right? And other well-known artists used to sort of have their own deals, basically, that was something like having your own record company. So it's not like it was never possible before. All right? The question is whether you make more. I mean, even Charles Dickens decided to self-publish some of his books because he was a big enough name. He thought his publisher wasn't treating him well. And so he was going to make and it was The Christmas Carol. He was going to make his own book and publish it himself. Well, he apparently went nuts, made this book with gilt edges and leather bindings and whatnot, and lost a lot of money. All right, so yes, people have always decided they wanted to get rid of the middleman, and they've always tried it, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. I'm not sure anything here, though, changes the basic story that you want to have somebody publicizing your work. You want to have somebody who can give you a producer, because it appears producers make music better. Otherwise, there's been a lot of wasted money in this industry over the years. And so for all of those things, there's going to be, it may not be the record companies we know, but someone's going to be doing that. And so we're going to see something that's not that different. We're not going to have people producing everything from scratch on their own, because then they're not busy specializing in what they do best, which is presumably making music. So the rest of the specialization has to go to someone else, and that's been done by the record companies. And I don't expect that to really change. Somebody else may be doing it, and they may be called record companies in the future, but that activity still has to be done. Yeah.
You said a lot of true things, but the most recent one was there's been a lot of money wasted in this industry. It's not at all clear, and I wonder if you have any evidence against what I'm about to say. It's not at all clear that the record companies really have earned all the money that they spend. You could reduce the rewards to being a record company, and for that matter, being reduced substantially the rewards to being a hit record artist, music artist, popular music artist, and you would still get a lot of music produced.
Yeah, okay, there's two questions in there, I think. One is the record company and one is the artist. Right. Okay, and you're referring to the superstar effect, where there's a small number of winners who make it really big, and lots of people who are not successful. And that's the way the industry's been, and that's the way a lot of these industries are. I can't tell you that I know that it's better to have the number that we have had, but what draws everyone in, to a large extent, is they want to be a star. And they want to make the money that goes with it. I'm not sure if you were just a star who actually was still living at home with mom and dad because you don't have enough money to buy a palatial estate, that people would want to be rock stars anymore. And I'm not sure the women would want them if that was the case. So the point is, yes, we have a superstar effect here. Is that bad? Does it mean that somehow we're getting inefficiency? I don't know. I would have to street a stronger case that inefficiency exists, because it would mean we have inefficiency in baseball and we have inefficiency in golf. We have inefficiency in all these tournaments where lots of people would like to do it, but they're not good enough. Let them stop wasting their time playing these stupid sports and do something more productive with themselves. I mean, that's sort of the argument you're making. I'm not particularly comfortable with that. I figure if this is what people want to do, they see the rewards, as long as they understand that, I mean, that's if they understand the odds.
You're saying that the industry changes to reflect the reality that you can't make that kind of money anymore.
Well, the industry will change. They're not making that kind of money anymore, and people will then have a presumably decreased interest in becoming stars because they're not as big a star as they were.
So what?
Well, if you believe that what markets produce are valuable, and that people like the music, and that the music that they like the most has greater value to them than the music that they like less, you're going to possibly get the wrong music being produced, and that is a cost. All right?
The music gets worse. I don't think it is already, but
You're not going to please him until you.
Right.
yeah. Well, Tom, you're not considering what the world would be like without one less Justin Bieber, I think.
That's kind of my point, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so
How will we tell?
You can put the go back to the U.S. Japan on that. So the exchange rate for the yen was approximately 100 to the dollar, and it looks like there's rough parity then in the U.S. and Japanese sales.
Well, I don't claim to remember what the exchange rate was between the two.
I do. So they're roughly equal.
Well, this is 1999.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember.
Okay. No, they're not. U.S. is bigger than Japan, and I know it's bigger than Japan by some reasonable margin. It's certainly more than 25. Either you're remembering the exchange rates wrong, or I'm remembering the difference wrong.
80 and 130 for the last couple of decades, and right now it's low because of.
But wait a minute. Okay.
But it's about 100. So the orders of magnitude.
But Tom, the U.S. dollar has deflated in the last 10 years, and the Japanese yen has inflated. Okay, so you're saying the U.S. dollar keeps having inflation and the exchange rate staying constant?
I'm not saying that. You're saying that.
No.
I say that you evaluate.
Well, tell you what, Tom, we can go and look it up and see, but I know that Japan is number 2.
It looks like the U.S. expenditures are 1/3 for GDP, or per capita, if you want to put it that way. But and I would suspect that the Japanese have been far more successful in selling music because they are.
Well, wait a minute. If you're saying it's 100 to 1.
I'm not saying it's 3 to 1.
No. The exchange rate is 100 to 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is 3.7 and that's 4.5.
Yeah.
Okay, so the U.S. is bigger, and it's bigger by more than 20. It's not 3 times as big.
Yeah.
It's
GDP is 3 times the size of Japan.
that's fine. I can believe that. That sounds correct. All right, so if you want to say per capita, I don't know what the different per capita expenditure is for different countries. These are just the total numbers.
Right.
And so it's possible that they do have a higher amount per capita in Japan. All right.
But so the conclusion, the implication that I draw is that the Japanese mobile market is singularly successful at selling data services. Okay, this comes from presumably the business models that have been adopted there, which are very strongly vertically coordinated. The so-called walled gardens that Docomo pioneered in 1999. This is a very famous story in the wireless industry, and has now been duplicated competitively by its 2 rivals in the mobile market. And they as far and away, they have higher mobile revenues in absolute numbers, percentage of the total industry revenues and all that, than any other market in the world. They sell a lot of music online.
Right, and that's not
on mobile handhelds.
right, and those are not easily pirated. So that might explain why they've had the smallest
Well,
decline.
that leads to my real question, which is that so you have models like that seem to be fairly successful, and you have iPod, iTunes hitting the market 2003 plus or minus, and that's tremendously successful in cleaning up a lot of this piracy.
No, it's not clear it's cleaned up any piracy.
No, it is clear. It's shifted enormous activity into the non-pirated sector.
There is no evidence whatsoever for that, Tom.
There's no evidence that Apple, now worth over $200 billion, has...
No, because the losses in the CDs are greater than the gains in the
They would have
online.
been worse if it weren't.
We don't know that.
Sure we do.
No, we don't.
We absolutely do, because...
No, we absolutely don't. I'll be happy to talk to you about it later. I actually did a little test, not very strong, to see whether or not iTunes appears to be benefiting.
So a legal market develops, generates tremendous economic activity, and that makes piracy worse?
It has no effect on piracy as far as I can tell.
Okay, fine.
All right, then we can both live with that.
Wait a minute. So this comes out of that marketplace you're talking about, the one that's taking a tailspin. And now there is this active, coordination of legal downloads. And it seems to me that is where the future lies in terms of...
I agree. The future, it's always been the case that the Internet's a better distribution form. It gets there quicker, and it's much cheaper to have it come over the net than it is to buy truck. The future was always going to be downloading of some sort, legal downloading, presumably. So that was always going to be the future. The question is whether or not iTunes, and it was a reasonable assumption to think that iTunes was going to stem, at least to some extent, the piracy. But there's no evidence that iTunes has stemmed the piracy at all.
So you're saying all substitution...
Seems to be from CDs.
Is from other stuff. There's no illegal...
That's what the evidence... Yeah, what I did was a counterfactual, where I took a look and said, let's see if I can remember exactly what I did. If all the iTunes stuff hadn't happened, what would the market look like? Because we know what iTunes was, and when you take a look at that, you realize that that iTunes doesn't appear to be stemming the decline at all.
Well, your forecast sucks.
But it's based on actual evidence.
Well, excuse
Tom, we'll have to talk about it. But I admit it's not that strong. Let me go to the back. But of course you have no evidence for yours.
Well,
I'll take the last word there. Okay, you go.
I noticed that a lot of your measurements for piracy, internet activity for a lot of cities. And I think what Professor Hazel is trying to get at is that you have services like Launch Radio and YouTube, which Launch Radio started in 1999 as an internet radio, completely legit, paid royalties and everything. And I know of that it's a commonplace in offices. You have YouTube running in the background listening to music. So how do you really separate out the illegal activity from the legal activity if you're just looking at internet activity?
Are you talking about not what I presented here, but you're talking about a paper that I wrote that was one of the list of papers where I take a look across cities from 1998 to 2003. All right, YouTube wasn't playing music legitimately in 2003. Okay, well, I take a look at cities, and I take a look at how the internet penetration has changed, and I take a look at how record sales have changed. All right, the easiest assumption, which would be sufficient, but it might not be true, is that the products you're talking about were about the same in all the cities, and then it just washes out. All right, now the other thing would be how big is your activity that you're talking about? What's the name of this radio? I don't think its market share of listening is likely to have ever been big enough to have much impact on this market. And it's got to be relatively big if it's going to talk about changing sales in a big way across the cities. So that would be the second problem I'd have with expecting that. Now, it is true, when I use internet penetration, it suffers from the form that's not telling us how many files are being downloaded. It's just telling us how many people are hooked up to the internet. And that's not a perfect measure. And the assumption I'm making, which I don't think is all that extreme, is that a city that has twice as much internet penetration as another is likely to have more file sharing than another. I think that's relatively reasonable. But that's one of the problems with econometrics. We have this data that's very imperfect, and then we only know we've made a mistake when we get a result that's totally preposterous. All right, and so how much confidence can we have that what we're finding is actually right? In the textbooks, some of them will even say it's a blessing when you get a result that's crazy because it means you've done something wrong. All right, which is right. But what does that imply about the results of people who don't get crazy results? We don't really know that they did it right. We just know they didn't do it wrong enough. Okay.
This actually ties together a few of these questions. It's clear that the fundamental unit of music sales has actually shifted to the individual song as opposed to the album. And I noticed that your data is based on an album. Did you aggregate individual sales into a hypothetical?
Yes. That's what I did. But it's also not true that most of the sold stuff is songs. Most of the sold stuff is still albums.
Even on iTunes?
On iTunes, it's like 60-40, mainly singles. But it's getting closer and closer every year, because one of the things that iTunes has did, if you wanted singles, your only option was really go to iTunes. So people who had a preference for singles are going to go to iTunes earliest. And the first numbers you're going to see are going to overrepresent the value of singles relative to albums. As iTunes gets bigger and bigger, and more people will start going for general reasons, the albums start getting a bigger share. My guess would be, I could be wrong on it, when enough people are on iTunes, albums are going to be more than 50%. But right now it's not.
Just kind of jumping from that point, did you also consider the indirect effects of piracy that are not necessarily harmful? Like there's been a shift from not just to singles, but also from LPs to EPs, because people say LPs are kind of artificially large. People don't want 12 songs, they want 6 songs. So all of a sudden you're selling a smaller unit for less money. And then also your overhead is lower with an electronic platform than it is with a CD or a record or a cassette. So did you compare profits or only revenues?
No, didn't compare profits because we don't have profits to compare. You're right that the digital distribution allows a lot more singles. It becomes more effective from a cost point of view to put singles out there. But the selling of singles should increase the profits, not decrease the profits of the sellers, because it's what's known as mixed bundling. Pure bundling is like an album by itself. Mixed bundling gives you another dimension where you can think about what you're pricing. And so, for example, you can just pick a price of singles that's high enough that you make as much profit on any single as you do on an album. Anyone who is interested in just that single, it's still going to be cheaper than the album, buys the single, and you can't lose money, even though they're now buying a single instead of an album. That's an option that's always available, and that's not necessarily the best option. So what we expect is mixed bundling gives you more flexibility as a seller. Being able to sell singles and albums should increase your profits, not decrease them. All right?
Doesn't that presume that the buyer wants everything that's on?
No, it doesn't. If you value only 2 songs on a CD and you're willing to pay $15 for it, then you value 2 songs at $15. So if you sell them separately at $7, you're willing to pay $7. And so that's the way it works. You're not being forced to buy anything. People misunderstand the way bundles work. All right, but you're not forced to buy anything. A bundle includes stuff that you may or may not value. But the total value of the bundle has to be higher than what you're paying, or you wouldn't buy it. All right, and there.
I mean, aren't you just totally? I mean, you may want 2 songs, but you're expecting that in the remaining 10 songs, there's going to be something else that you want.
Okay, so then you think there's some other value.
That would rather eliminate that X factor.
Okay,
and only
so.
pay $2 for 2 songs than pay $15.
Well, but wait a minute. If you only have 2 songs that are worth 2 to you, and then you have the X factors that's worth 1, you're not going to buy an album for 15. You're only going to pay 5 for an album.
Between one or the other. I mean, if you're saying, okay.
The choice is buy the album or keep your money. The example you're giving me is you should keep your money. If you're buying an album and the album costs $15, those songs together are worth $15 to you, based on what you know of those songs at the time you buy them, and assuming that there's no new information that makes you suddenly decide you've changed your mind about the value of the songs. But, you know, forgetting that because that just complicates it. If those songs are worth $15 to you, whether it's 14 for one and 1 for all the others to get together, it's still 15, and that's why you're buying it. If only one song has any value and it's worth 15 to you, then you're willing to pay 15 for the single. That's just simple arithmetic. It has to be true.
Except that people don't think that.
They don't have to think that way. They just have to act that way. That's economics. We assume people.
Cable operators think that way.
Yeah.
So we have a reception right out here in the atrium. Please join us, and please join me in thanking and applauding our speakers. You're going to have to go farther than tell me your forecast. There has to be substitution in the legal services because you've made the legal services.
You would think there would be some. And I don't